So right before I came here to preach, at the very end of February, I went on a trip to Patagonia, Chile. And I was away from the internet for 9 days. Now, this was not intentional. They told me there would be Wi-Fi where I was, but it turns out that when you are at a retreat center that is on the other side of a mountain on a lake, 2.5 hours from everyone, sometimes the internet just doesn't work. They don't have any explanation for it. It just didn't work while I was there. And it was very hard for me for the first 2 days. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I was like, what did I do before the internet? And then I settled into it, right? And it was amazing. And there were waterfalls and hikes and incredible vistas and people and connection. So when I came back, I had to go through New York and go through customs. This was like the worst way to come back into the country that I can possibly imagine. I was late because flights were delayed and various things, and it was like night and day. I've never seen anything so radically different, feel so different in my body. Simultaneously, as I was rushing around trying to get through customs, I had notification after notification like coming back up on my phone. So, getting back to social media after being gone for 9 days was just like wave after wave of despair, right? And anger and frustration and anxiety. And to be perfectly honest with you, I have full-on avoided Facebook since I got back. Like, I go on, I check things, I'm running a group, so I have to be on it, which is fine. I go in, I check in my very intentional groups, and then I leave. I have to. Because what I have found is that it is in no way useful for me right now to be on Facebook. Now, I'm not telling you what to do, you do you. But for me, I was starting to realize that going into this constant information overload was actually not allowing me to figure out what it was that I was actually doing to make any difference in the world, right? So in 1966, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was our keynote speaker at GA. Was anybody there? Did anybody go? No? Okay. So the speech was 3 years after his I Have a Dream speech and just 2 years before his assassination, right? And he was 37, which is 1 year younger than I am now. He began his speech first by expressing that he was really grateful to know that he was among friends, people who would take him seriously and listen, right? And then he sort of told this story about Rip Van Winkle. And so this is a little quote from his speech at GA. One of the things we usually remember about the story of Rip Van Winkle is that he slept for 20 years. But there is another point in this story which is almost always completely overlooked. It's the sign on the inn where he goes up and he goes past the sign and it's King George III, right? And when he wakes up 20 years later, it is a picture of George Washington, the first president of the United States. So when Rip Van Winkle looked up and saw George Washington, he was amazed. He was completely lost. He knew not where he was, right? This incident reveals to us that the most striking thing about the Rip Van Winkle story is not merely that he slept for 20 years, but that he slept through a revolution, right? And he goes on to say that there is nothing more tragic than sleeping through a revolution. This is a major call to action to us, specifically as Unitarian Universalists, right? So lately I've been asking myself this question, and I think it's, by lately I mean for like years now. How do we stay awake to the world's suffering and ensure that we are not sleeping through a revolution while not getting so tired that we cannot sustain our efforts, right? And we're in February, and I don't know about you, but I find February just exhausting. It's almost over, but it's just an exhausting time of year. I don't know why, but we're all just worn out by now, I think. So late winter, that's where we are. It's a time to prepare, right? We get a chance to prepare before spring. We get a chance to ask ourselves, when the world is bleak, how can we prepare to birth love again into the world? So I want to talk a little bit about anxiety. That feeling I got when I got back on social media. That feeling where we need to know everything right now, right? It speeds us up. It makes us feel like everything has to happen right now. And it leads to these sort of rash and kind of unproductive actions. And then it leads to paralysis, right? Our thoughts race ahead of our emotions. Our minds scramble to think what we can do immediately. And when we realize there are so many people at risk and there are so many things to fear, we can lose all of our energy and go into a cultured despair, just despair, right? And that's useless. It does nothing to be despairing. So what we need to do is take time to slow down. Play music, draw, right? Make cookies, take up a new skill, create rituals that sustain you. And if you don't have a spiritual practice, all of those things I just named are spiritual practices, right? You know, they don't have to be some deeply impactful thing. They can just be something you like doing. That's all a spiritual practice really has to be. So in one of my favorite articles, and this came out a while ago, it's called A Nervous Wreck's Disabled Guide to Stepping Up. Author Madison Maria Lynn has devised a 5-step system to help people of all abilities overcome this sense of overwhelm that can happen when we're faced with so many injustices and so many things that need to get done. And she says that there are so many organizations that need our help. It's easy to drown in the sea of I shouldn't do this, or I should do this, or I can't do this. And there are a lot of people who are frustrated with the accessibility issues, right, around some of the more common forms of resistance. So the first thing she says, and we did this a little bit today, is to feel your feelings. She calls this a pre-step. Before you do anything else, when we're hit with something major, when we're hit with a tragedy, we need to go within and feel what we're feeling. We need to allow grief to happen, right? And we need to really let that happen. And the second one is to make a list of everything that you're good at. I love this step. I love lists. I'm such a list person. So it doesn't have to be associated with justice work, right? That's the key to this list, is it's just anything you're good at. Whatever your skills are, you just make a list of them. So my list might include photography, or writing, or public speaking, or internet research, or basic web design, or dog training, or sexual education, or youth ministry, right? Yours might include cooking, or carpentry, knitting, party planning, music. You get the idea. You write down as many of these things as you can think of, and you keep that list somewhere handy, right? I keep mine just over my desk to remind myself what I can bring to the world at any given time that probably won't drain me, right? Because things that you're really good at don't drain you as much as doing the things that are super challenging for you. So then the next step is to make a list of your limitations. And we all have limitations. Every single one of us has things we can and cannot do. So she says this, I consider my limitations. I don't place judgments on them. I accept my limitations for what they are. I write them down on paper. I cannot stand for long periods of time or march long distances. I cannot risk arrest. I cannot go to a venue that has a flight of stairs without an elevator or an escalator, right? Many of us in this room, I'm sure, have that too. It's like we have bodies. They can do things. They can't do all things. So she gives herself space for feeling any feels that she has about her limitations, right? And then she appreciates those people who can go out there and put their bodies on the line, but she realizes that that's just not what she can do, right? So I love this part of the assessment because I guess all of our limitations are very different, but one of mine is that I'm a very highly sensitive nervous system. So if I go and I do something in a big crowd, and it takes weeks to get there, or it takes huge amounts of transitions, then I am out for like a month afterward. It takes me that long to recover. And so, not that I never want to do those things, right? I did go to the march in 2017, but like I was done for a month after that. I really couldn't do almost anything else. And so I have to ask myself, as a mother of a 5-year-old, was that worth my time and energy, or are there other acts that I could have done that might have been less visible but just as impactful, right? So we have feel your feelings, make a list of your skills, make a list of your limitations, and then you make a list of all of the organizations that you are already associated with. You don't go out and try to find a million more organizations. You write down the ones that you're already involved with, okay? So if you can write or draw, but you are not able to march or protest, you can make signs for those people who are marching and protesting, right? If you want to support people of color within our denomination and have financial resources, you can give to the Black Lives of UU, right? As a Unitarian Universalist, you are automatically connected to a lot of programs. There are probably 5 or 6 really in-depth programs happening at this church. And I am 100% sure that your social justice committee will be happy to connect you with them, right? So, making an effort to keep things local is another thing that any of us can do. So if you want, support local organizations, don't put your money in giant banks. These are very, very simple, basic things. They take very little of our time. They take very little of our energy to make them happen. So, the most important thing is to not try to tackle everything, because then you won't tackle anything. So pick 1 or 2 things that you are already involved with, things that matter to you the most, and then go all in. Go all in with the skills that you have. Do not push all of your limitations. These things keep it sustainable. And in fact, when you are doing justice work that pulls on your skills and not your limitations, it's not going to wear you out. It is, in fact, its own form of spiritual practice, because actually accomplishing things is very rejuvenating for our bodies and for our minds and for our systems. So, this is a very simple sermon today. It's so simple. Do not get anxious and continually scroll on Facebook. That does nothing. It does nothing except make you miserable. I promise, it does nothing. There are times for education, and I'm not saying don't stay educated. Do. But take breaks, right, from that education piece to act on the things that you've been educated on. Okay. So, I want to remind us very quickly, as we're in election season, that we're not trying to go back to something. I think most of us know that, but sometimes it gets hard to remember that there's something better, right? There's something better than what was happening even 5 years ago. We don't want to go back to 5 years ago. 5 years ago wasn't good enough. 5 years ago still isn't good enough, right? We don't want to go back to 2015. And it's hard to look through the grief and the apathy and just the constant state of anxiety to remember that what we have to do is keep our standards high enough. They have to be really, really high, because it's when we lose our standards that we lose our hope, okay? So hope doesn't diminish when things are bad. That is not when it diminishes. That is when hope is alive. That is when we are best able to use our hope. Hope diminishes when we don't have standards that are high enough, when what we're hoping for is no longer something we even want, right? Hope diminishes when we lose sight of who we are and where we can be going. Remember also that revolutions take a really, really long time, okay? So he didn't go to sleep overnight, right? Rip Van Winkle, we're not mad at him for sleeping. That is not the issue. The issue is that he slept for 20 years. That's a really long time. When we look back at the civil rights movement, it's easy to think of it as a time in which a ton of things happened, but it was slow going. There were 10 years before, like major parts of this movement. And people slept in between those two things. They rested, they planned, right? Okay. You are allowed to rest through the revolution. I just want to say we're all allowed to rest through the revolution. You are allowed to sleep and love and be joyful and turn off your notifications. You just are. In order to change the world, we have to get really grounded, right? We have to get really present to what's happening around us. And that means the beauty that's happening around us too, not just all of the terrible things. We need to be able to envision a country, right, where peacefully people live, of all religions and cultures, where people have access to power, a place where every person has enough food, good education, opportunities for creativity and play, a place where we can openly love who we love and safely present our genders, a place where we value the bounty of the planet and the creatures who reside here with us. We need to create this vision with all of ourselves. We need to be able to imagine the feeling of living inside of that reality so that we can radiate out a powerful hope of a world that is filled with love. I know you are tired, but come, there is a way.